Good afternoon, Commission stakeholders. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, December 16th. We are about to hold our SB1 competitive program workshop on incorporating transportation equity. I am seeing that we still have several attendees joining us, so I am going to pause for about 1 to 2 minutes, and then we will get this workshop started. So thank you for joining us. Okay, my clock is saying 2 minutes after 1, so we will go ahead and proceed. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our All SB1 Competitive Program Workshop on Better Incorporating Transportation Equity. My name is Matthew Yozgat, and I'm the Deputy Director of SB1 Programming here at the California Transportation Commission. In this capacity, I oversee the programs at the Commission, which were created by the passing of Senate Bill 1 back in 2017. I work with an amazing team of program managers and analysts and planning staff, and I'm also fortunate to be joined this afternoon by Sequoia Erasmus, the Commission's Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement. Sequoia, I will turn it over to you yourself.
Great, thanks, Matthew, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. We're really delighted to be able to present with you on this topic and also hold what I'm hoping will be a robust discussion around equity and engagement and all subject matters related. Again, my name is Sequoia Erasmus, and I'm the Associate Deputy Director of Equity Engagement here at the California Transportation Commission, and I am part of the planning team. And so today, to get a better sense of who's in the virtual space, I will just ask folks who are on the line to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you wouldn't mind putting your name, your preferred pronouns, your agency or organization, and where you're joining us from today. I will open my chat. Go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, I'm actually going to turn it over to Kayla Giese, who's one of the analysts on our team, to cover some workshop logistics so that our attendees know the different options on how they can contribute to our conversation today. Kayla, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matthew. Good afternoon, everybody. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The workshop agenda is located under the Handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. It can also be found on the Commission's website. We also included today's PowerPoint presentation under the Handouts tab. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handouts tabs. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as a part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are two options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the raise hand feature as early into the topic as you can to give the system time to recognize you. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Matthew and Sequoia.
Thank you very much, Kayla. We can move, yes, to this slide. Thank you. As with all of the Commission's programming workshops, I just want to reiterate some of our standing items for each workshop. So just to reiterate to our attendees that the presentation you're seeing today, so the PowerPoint, as well as a video recording of this presentation, will be posted to the Commission's website following this workshop. Commission staff will be making recommendations based on the discussion and the feedback that we have today. So ultimately what that means is my team and I on the programming side, as well as Sequoia and our planning team, will come together after today's discussion and discuss real ways to implement actual changes within the SB1 program guidelines following today's discussion. I will also say that we know we have a chance that today's conversation can be particularly robust, so we will reserve the opportunity to carry topics over to a subsequent workshop. This could be at one of the SB1 program workshops that we have scheduled in early 2022. And the last part that I want to bring up is that portions of today's presentation will be interactive utilizing the Slido interaction app, which I believe is anonymous. During that portion of the presentation, we will ask attendees to have access to their web browser or a smartphone if they have one to follow the Slido prompts with options to scan a QR code or access a web page with a shown code. I'll also say, you don't see this on this slide, but at any point during the presentation, if there is a question that you'd like to ask or a comment that you'd like to make, feel free to drop it into the questions function of the GoTo or raise your hand. And both Sequoia and I will make sure to check in with Kayla so that we can have all active comments or questions spoken into the conversation. So I will proceed as I'm not seeing any hands raised or anything yet. Briefly, I wanted to refer each of you to the attachments indicator within the GoToWebinar application to access today's agenda for reference, which I'm briefly going to cover now as well. So as we mentioned, today we'll be providing an overview on the importance of transportation equity, as well as an overview of the SB1 competitive programs and guidelines development process. We'll then get into the bulk of today's workshop, which is a focus to initiate discussion on how to meaningfully consider transportation equity within the SB1 competitive programs. This will include community engagement, identifying disadvantaged or vulnerable communities, identifying project benefits and strategies to avoid harm, or anything else that stakeholders would like to raise. We'll then close with a recap and allow for any remaining questions or comments before covering some next steps. At this time, I will turn it back over to Sequoia to cover the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Matthew. So before we dive into our discussion today, we thought it would be really important to talk about where we are at as a commission and our priorities around including equity in everything that we do. So in January 2021, the commission adopted its racial equity statement, which again continues to guide more and more all of the work that we do. And part of the reason for this workshop is really rooted in our commitment to our racial equity statement. So our racial equity statement says that the California Transportation Commission recognizes that throughout California's history, improvements to the state's transportation system have disproportionately benefited some population groups and burdened others. And that while infrastructure improvements were being built, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color were disenfranchised and underrepresented in government decision-making. And we know that our programs are rooted in this history and this is a fundamental guiding process for us. Next slide, please. And so perhaps most importantly, the Commission condemns all forms of racism and is actively working to promote equitable outcomes through our programs, policies, and practices, including our SB1 funding programs. Kayla, are there any questions on this part or comments that you see?
Hi, Sequoia. I'm not seeing any written questions quite yet, and it doesn't look like we have any hands raised yet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on then.
Thanks, Sequoia. I'll take it over from here for a little bit. So as you can see, the three programs that we're focusing on for our discussion today are the Local Partnership Program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. Although my team is not actively presenting, I want to mention and introduce Christine Gordon, the Program Manager for the Local Partnership Program, Hannah Walter, the Program Manager for the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, and Naveen Habib, the Program Manager for the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, who are all joining us on the webinar today as well. On behalf of my team and the Commission, I wanted to reiterate the importance of better integrating equitable outcomes within the Senate Bill 1 competitive programs. While our programs are rooted in the statutory intent of the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, which we regularly refer to as SB1, the Commission is committed to promoting equitable outcomes through our programs, policies, and practices. This means revisiting our existing programs each cycle to ensure we're continuing to meet that mission. We do have existing examples of ways our programs currently promote equitable outcomes, some of which are evaluating an application's ability to demonstrate meaningful public outreach and engagement of the proposed project to show that communities are in support of it within the local partnership program. There's an entire existing community factors evaluation criteria built into the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. And there's also a requirement in the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program that all projects must demonstrate that any negative environmental or community impacts are entirely avoided or mitigated. However, we are still compelled to further promote equitable outcomes within our programs, and today's workshop is intended to gather feedback from our stakeholders to inform how we can do so. So ultimately, we're aiming to integrate transportation equity into some of our existing criteria, evaluation criteria, I should say, and we'll also consider creating a standalone transportation equity evaluation criteria as well. Following today's workshop, we'll regroup internally on what we've heard and propose revisions to our program guidelines based on these discussions in one of our upcoming program workshops, which will be respective to each program. I'll now provide some background on each program before we get into the discussion, which is primarily for anyone who may be joining us for the first time or is generally unfamiliar with our SB1 programs. We can go to, yes, we are on the Local Partnership Program is the first program I will cover today. The objective of the Local Partnership Program is to provide funding to counties, cities, transportation districts, and regional transportation agencies that have voter-approved taxes, tolls, or fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements, or that have imposed fees, including uniform developer fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements. This funding is meant to complement spending on transportation projects that these jurisdictions have already committed to. The Local Partnership Program has an annual funding capacity of $200 million, which is broken down between 60% formula-driven amounts to specific eligible agencies and 40% competitive funding available to competitive applicants. Next slide, please. Applicant eligibility for this program is limited to cities, counties, or transportation districts that have taxes, tolls, or fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements. The formulaic program is only eligible to those agencies with voter-approved taxes, tolls, or fees, while the competitive program is eligible to that group as well as those jurisdictions that have imposed taxes, tolls, or fees. The local partnership program has a very broad range of eligible project types, and you can see some of the predominant types listed here, which include improvements to road infrastructure, transit facilities, active transportation facilities, as well as acquisition of buses, transit equipment, or rolling stock. Project planning or anything pre-environmental are not eligible, nor are transportation operations. Next slide, please. The second program I will cover is the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. The objective of the Congested Corridors program is to fund projects designed to reduce congestion along highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation, community impacts, and provide environmental benefits. The Congested Corridors program has an annual funding capacity of $250 million, which is all competitive funding available to competitive applicants. Next slide, please. Applicant eligibility is limited to regional transportation planning agencies, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans. In case anyone isn't familiar, I would say these RTPA or regional transportation planning agencies and county transportation commissions are typically the transportation mechanism of each county government. And obviously Caltrans is the Department of Transportation and a close partner of the commission. The Congested Corridors program does have eligibility criteria, which states that each project submitted must be included in a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan and a regional transportation plan. And for those projects that are within the boundaries of a metropolitan planning organization, for instance, like the Southern California Association of Governments or SCAG, or the Sacramento Area Council of Governments or SACOG in Sacramento, they must be consistent with an approved sustainable community strategy. Eligible projects are transformative ones designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation improvements, community impacts, and that provide environmental benefits. I do want to note that general purpose lanes are not eligible for funding in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. And the next slide will bring us to our third and final program that I will discuss today, the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. The objective of the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program is to fund public transportation infrastructure projects that have a high volume of freight movement and to support the goals of the National Highway Freight Program, the California Freight Mobility Plan, and the guiding principles of the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. The Trade Corridor Enhancement Program has an annual funding capacity of roughly $400 million, which is all competitive funding available to competitive applicants. And next slide, please. Thank you. In order to apply to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, an application must be submitted by a city, a county, a metropolitan planning organization, a regional transportation planning agency, a port authority, a public construction authority, or by Caltrans. Furthermore, in order for applications to be eligible, they must be in a regional transportation plan, and if within the boundaries of an MPO, consistent with an approved sustainable communities strategy. Eligible projects are ones that enhance the freight system's economic activity or vitality, relieve congestion on the freight system, improve safety and resilience of the freight system, improve freight system infrastructure, implement technology or innovation to improve the freight system, or reduce or avoid its negative impacts, or reduce or avoid adverse community and or environmental impacts of the freight system. I know I just said a lot about our three programs, and I can also elaborate that if any of our attendees have any questions specific to each of the programs or any of the information that I just shared, I know that our program managers, whose contact information I can provide or is available on our website, would be more than happy to set aside some time and have a discussion with you. And Kayla, we can move on to the next slide before I turn it back over to Sequoia. So really briefly, I want to elaborate on guidelines development for the SB1 program. Each of the programs I highlighted, as I mentioned, were established by Senate Bill 1, which again provides the statutory foundation for each of these programs. SB1 also tasks the California Transportation Commission with building program policy for each of the programs through a public guidelines development process. Commission staff, I'm hoping you just heard my dog barking as we just had a apologize for that. The staff took us on for the first round of including the programs back in 2018. And this is the process that we again find ourselves in with the upcoming iterations of the SB1 competitive programs. Each set of program guidelines governs how the programs are implemented, facilitated, as well as how funds are distributed to reimburse agencies for expenditures. Now, in each of the program's third cycles, commission staff are holding roughly 7 to 8 public workshops per program to update guidelines with proposed changes to be delivered to the commission by summer of 2022. As I mentioned, guidelines updates are informed through our stakeholder engagement process. And to this point, we've held about 3 workshops per program and anticipate holding roughly 1 workshop per program on a monthly basis through April 2022. Once the commission approves guidelines revisions in the late summer of 2022, so we're aiming for the August CTC meeting, adopted guidelines will govern project selection and program implementation for the upcoming program cycles. With that, I will turn it over to Sequoia.
Great, thank you. I am very grateful for my little deaf dog right now who does not do that, so that's all right. Thank you for reminding us that we're here. So moving into the workshop focus portion of our agenda. Next slide, please. So the goal of this workshop is to create a dialogue where we as commission staff are able to capture the expertise of all of you, our statewide agency and advocacy and NGO and everything in between partners. We recognize that many of you dedicate your careers to and lives to creating a more just and equitable transportation system in California. And we hope that through the following Slido questions and discussion prompts that we're able to capture some of your expertise as guideposts for our guidelines updates. So with this, we've integrated Slido into this presentation so if you haven't yet, go ahead and try to scan the QR code with either your phone camera or enter the website code listed on the slide to participate. And so again, we'll be using Slido for the following next couple of questions, but you're also welcome to comment in the chat. If this doesn't adequately capture your thoughts around this question, feel free to email us or call us directly and we can discuss these priorities further. So again, we're excited to be able to present this presentation primarily as a discussion, and also recognizing that we still will only be able to cover some of the important topics that relate to equity. So we definitely invite you to provide your expert insights into directions for future workshops and conversations around this topic. And I'll give folks a couple more minutes to continue adding. Thanks so much for those of you that have participated so far. Shout out to ATP. And thanks to Kayla for managing this slideshow. It's really helpful to have you here. Got INFRA, the ARB STEP program, Transformative Climate Communities. And for anyone that's adding into here, we invite you, if you feel compelled to speak on your response, we'd love to hear kind of why and what about these programs show exemplary integration of equity criteria. So if you feel compelled to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and we can bring you into the conversation. And I can't see if people have their hands raised, so I rely completely on our admin team.
Hi, Sequoia. Not seeing any hands raised quite yet. And we don't have any written questions yet in the questions tab.
Great, thank you. The raise grant, high-speed rail, TSEP, okay. Awesome, thank you. So this poll will remain open. So if you think later about something, or just something comes up to you after we've moved on, please feel free to add in. We'll be compiling the responses and kind of using them to guide us in the future. Okay, we can move on to the next question.
Sequoia, before we do move on, we did receive a comment.
Okay, great.
Just really quick. So this is from Patricia Chen, and they said they suggested infra because it mentions race explicitly, as well as barriers to opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Patricia. Yeah, are there any other? Okay, yeah, we'll move on. But same format for this. So the question here is, what are some examples of equity metrics or indicators that your agency has identified or found useful? And with this question, you know, we totally are on board with the understanding that equity metrics and indicators are, you know, are part of the story, and sometimes can be limiting, but also can sometimes really enhance a narrative. So we're really curious here how you or your agency are using metrics or indicators to provide a deeper vision of the story. Oh, female head of household. Okay. And again, if you feel like you want to add to why this has been useful, please feel free to drop it in the chat or comment verbally. Rent burden, population density. Health burden, race, ethnicity, distribution, broadband access, renter population, walking to transit from origin and destination, income level. Great, thank you. From LA Metro, equity focused communities. Yes. All right. There's a lot. Oh, grievances. That's trackable. Great. Thank you. Racially concentrated areas of affluence. Vehicle ownership. Very interesting. Thank you. Would anybody like to dive a little deeper into why, either in the chat or commenting? Equity priority communities, renter, monolingual, non-English speaking households. Great, I see equity priority communities a lot. That seems to be a really helpful and robust index. Great, thank you. Okay, so if there are no comments in the chat, we can go ahead and move to the third Slido question. So our last Slido question is, in which sections of our guidelines do you believe that equity considerations and criteria should be included? This question stems from us kind of analyzing, should equity be a standalone criteria? Should we integrate it into each section of the guidelines? How are you all doing it? How do you see us capturing equity and promoting equitable outcomes best? Engagement. Scoring criteria. Oh, and this is going to come as a word cloud. Integrated throughout. Public outreach, project identification, the narrative. A dynamic word cloud. Should be a standalone section, integrated throughout. In a future iteration of this, I'd love to see like an upvote of some of these answers. Awesome. Seems like engagement is a really popular response here. Public outreach, scoring criteria, integrated throughout. Are there any comments in the chat, Kayla?
Hi, Sequoia. We do have one that we just received from Bruce Abernathy. FTA grants include equity as part of the project planning information.
Great, thanks, Bruce.
That's it for written questions right now, and I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. Great, thanks. This is really interesting to see in the word cloud version how things are coming out. We'll give it a couple more seconds for folks to add if they haven't yet. All right, well, thanks so much for contributing to these Slido questions. Again, you're welcome to continue to add to them at any point through this presentation, but we'd like to move into our discussion portion of the presentation. So hopefully folks are feeling warmed up and ready to add and have a dynamic conversation. So here we go. So as we draft our concept language for SB1 funding program updates to incorporate equity, there are a few more key areas that we'd like to discuss with you all today. So these areas include strategies for improving community engagement and accountability, identifying disadvantaged or vulnerable communities, identifying project benefits and strategies to avoid harm, and also we welcome any other areas that you all have identified in your own processes that you think are really important areas to consider as we create a meaningful consideration of transportation equity. So again, if you prefer to drop your response in the chat, email us, you're absolutely welcome to do so. And we really hope to engage with you all in some dialogue now and encourage folks to share as they see fit. So again, the question is kind of how do we do this better? How do we improve community engagement through our guidelines? How should we create strategies to identify disadvantaged or vulnerable, or other ways of identification of communities, such as equity priority communities? And what are the project benefits that you're pulling out, and what are strategies that you're utilizing to avoid harm? Kelsey, Kayla, are there any responses in the chat?
Hi, Sequoia. We don't have any responses yet, but we did have a question. Someone asked how we access the chat box. I think that it may be confusing on GoToWebinar. I believe our attendees maybe only have access to an actual questions tab. So if you have a comment or a question, you can just use that questions tab. Like if you used it to introduce yourself earlier when Sequoia asked. So that is the tab that you should be looking for. We did, while I was giving that spiel, we did get one comment in, and then we do have a hands raised. So I'll go ahead and read this comment, and then I'll turn it over to Cherry.
Great.
So let's see. This question is also from Bruce Abernathy, and they would like to know if they sent a recent FTA grant application form so that we can see where equity is included in that. Who should they email this to at the CTC?
Both Matthew and I, and we'll have our emails up at the end of the presentation. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing resources.
Okay, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Cherry to take care of some hands raised.
Okay, first up we have Grecia Elenas. Grecia, I am unmuting you. It looks like you are self-muted at the moment.
Hi, okay. Sorry, I raised my hand because I couldn't find the question tabs, and that was the only option I had, so thank you. So as far as to answer kind of the first portion of the community engagement, meaningful considerations, I think there's some pretty good models. I had raised earlier the Transformative Climate Communities program and kind of the prioritization that they set forth in their own guidelines. So, I actually just recently reread the newest iterations of those guidelines, and the focus is on how is it that folks are engaged, throughout the whole process, and that is in the statute itself, which I think is incredibly important. And I think, again, provides a model for how programs across the state should really function to really engage folks in the inception of the project all the way throughout, because oftentimes what we see, and apologies, I work for a leadership council for Justice and Accountability, and we're a nonprofit in the Central and Eastern Coachella Valley, to give some context. So we work with a lot of local low-income communities, both in some of the smaller cities, as well as the city of Fresno, and in the rural unincorporated parts. And so one thing that we have noticed throughout the process is, there's always partial engagement. So it's either, the inception part, and you never hear from staff again unless we intentionally follow up. And as paid advocates, we have the privilege of being able to hey, let's continue to bug folks to see where we are in this process, and making sure that it being very intentional that in the engagement portion of it, that we are actually asking folks what projects they want to see, versus coming forward with a already half-baked idea where it's really, really hard to actually get input or even change the project itself. And I think once we do that, we address a lot of the equity issues as far as, hey, we're going to have a road expansion. What implications does that have on a community? Whether it's going to be increased EMTs, increased GHGs without any urban greening. Would folks rather see, some sort of active transportation or alternative modes of transportation projects coming into their community? And I think this also addresses, again, any easements that need to go onto people's homes. That's always a very, very sensitive topic. And so if folks are brought into the conversation from the get-go, it becomes a lot easier to get a lot of buy-in and a lot of ownership from the community who want to see this project come through and defend the project, when it goes before, city council or board of supervisors or whoever. And so I think just again, I'll just keep it short and just say, you know, the TCC model of like engaging communities from the get-go in a very genuine, hey, what is it that you want to see matter? And then continuing that process throughout is incredibly important. And I think, you know, the identifying the disadvantaged and vulnerable communities portion is, you know, there's so many metrics, so many tools available to us nowadays that I think, you know, they all paint different portraits of various communities, and while also recognizing that, you know, there are several data gaps, especially in unincorporated communities and especially in, you know, unincorporated and rural communities. So making sure that we provide that flexibility for local jurisdictions to work, again, in a meaningful way with communities, with CBOs, with informal community groups, to be able to make the case of like, hey, yes, we may rank in a, you know, top 35%, so may not be considered a disadvantaged community, but here is the reality that we live, and this is why we should be doing X, Y, Z types of projects. And so I think, you know, it's a fine balance, and I won't say it's easy at all, of like, how do we figure it out of, you know, using the data that we do have, but also providing the flexibility for communities and jurisdictions to make their case as well. And I think for the last part of identifying project benefits, that goes back to the community engagement portion. I think I really do think the solution is engaging folks from the get-go and having them drive the projects they want to see and the solutions that they want to see, because I think that will address all of these additional issues that often arise that are often unintended consequences, you know, whether it's potential displacement, whether it's additional, you know, hey, now there's this very dangerous corner that makes it really hard for school kids who are walking home to get around. Like, it really does address a lot of these unintended consequences if you are genuine in your engagement with community from the get-go and throughout. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Grecia, for kicking us off with that. Just to kind of recap, what I heard is that TCC provides a useful example of including communities from the beginning, which can help have a more robust and therefore more representative engagement process that can identify benefits and negative and harm kind of from the beginning. So thank you so much for that. Are there any other comments or discussion of this question?
We have another hand raised. Paul Kripka, I'm going to unmute you. You're free to speak, but it looks like you are, yeah, you're free to speak.
Very good, thank you. Paul Krupka, City of Redwood City, California, and pleased to be here and help integrate such a critical, you know, life element, if you will. But my advice, thinking about the guidelines and how to best make it work, are a few things. One, keep it simple. And I think that just looking at, for instance, secondary evaluation criteria under the solutions for congested corridors, it seems to me, pivoting off of previous comments and the woman who spoke so eloquently about honest engagement, it seems to me that a community support in general criterion would be very appropriate in the secondary evaluation criteria to really emphasize how crucial it is. The other thing that I saw is that I think some carefully worded additions to the existing criteria could really emphasize this. Yeah, there, you know, the matters that I see when I'm thinking about the disadvantaged or communities that are often overlooked, I'm going to say, you know, they face safety issues, accessibility issues, the opportunity for actually having a home within the the area in question, or the project area. The efficient land use category actually fits well in terms of explaining and expanding how efficient land use applies to equity communities. And then finally, under economic development and job creation and retention, there are two things. One is simply engagement up front about the opportunity for jobs created by the particular construction project that we're trying to get funded. And similarly, the matters of proper carry out of the project with regard to the existing land uses and proposed land uses really suggest that there probably is some metrics that we would look at for, true economic impact of property, like property value. So again, keep it simple, integrate well-crafted language into the actual existing criteria, and then consider adding a engagement or community support criterion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that really useful response. To kind of sum up what I heard so far, is utilizing like existing criteria with carefully worded additions around safety, accessibility, housing prices, and kind of using those categories to help expand how we understand how they relate to equity and equitable outcomes. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
Sequoia, I'm gonna jump in very briefly and also thank Paul for his suggestions and contribution. I think that's very, very good feedback. Certainly, underscoring keeping it simple so that applicants can actually follow through with what we're intending some of the outcomes to be. I also want to offer or actually make this request, and time willing, if you, Paul, or if any of our other stakeholders on the line do have any specific ideas, if you have one of the programs in mind or a general idea for all three programs, if there is specific language or like a way to reword something for simplicity's sake, I would absolutely encourage you to consider drafting up those revisions and sending them to us for our consideration. I think transportation equity is very complex, and one of our attempts to try and capture what each of our stakeholders consider important to them in the region is to have a conversation like this. But I can say if we can get any of your feedback or proposed edits even by email, or if you'd rather have like a phone call with either myself or a member of my team, we absolutely welcome that as well. So just wanted to throw that out as an option. I know we likely won't get to everything today, but I value that feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Great. We welcome any comments from the chat or any other discussion.
Hi, Sequoia, it's Kayla. We did receive a mixture of questions and comments now through the questions tab. So okay. I'll go ahead and start with those. The first one is a question from Hubin Alvarez. Could equity be weighted heavier, and should programs or projects report the updates and tracking?
Matthew, do you want to?
Yeah, I can handle that. And I caught the whole question. I actually briefly want to apologize for the barking dog that you heard a little bit earlier. That's George, and he started barking again, but I think he's stopped. So I can say, okay, so your question is, should we consider weighting transportation equity more heavier? And I would say the response to that would be, you know, well, it's kind of twofold, right? Each of the programs have statutory intent and objectives behind them. And so I wouldn't imagine we'd be able to exceed the statutory intentions of the programs by considering something to be more or less important than them. However, we're open to accepting that type of feedback. You know, if based on the SLIDA responses and some of what we've been hearing, if we can figure out a way to integrate equity or equitable outcomes through existing criteria, or even build a standalone criteria, that could be seen as a mechanism where, you know, equitable outcomes or transportation equity would be a bit more of a weighted evaluation criteria, where we're asking for responses to have that lens as the way that applicants describe or respond to them. The separate question you had, I think, was regarding tracking, and I will admit I would assume it will be challenging to monitor or ask agencies to report on, you know, qualitative equity outcomes that projects might have. But I know, you know, we do require agencies to report on progress and completion status of their projects. If, you know, as a group, we can identify how equity can be one of those performance metrics that can be tracked over time, and we can all agree on, you know, what those metrics might be. I know looking a bit down the road, the department or Caltrans is developing an equity index tool. Maybe something like that could be utilized down the road in a future cycle as something that could be tracked over time. But again, I will admit I am expert in this field, but it's something that can be explored.
Thanks, Matthew. We do have several more comments, so I'll go to the next one. This is from Carrie Cartwright. Job creation, construction, and spinoff generated in disadvantaged communities. Increased income can lead to improved health coverage. And then the following one is from Patricia Chen, and she gave us some background, so I'm going to go ahead and read that first. The following is background that goes with her comment that I will read next. LA Metro has an Office of Equity and Race, and that could not be here today at the workshop, that we evaluate equity using equity assessment tools, which consider things like equity-focused communities, which are defined by a combination of race, income, and presence of automobiles in families in an area, quality and quantity of outreach to and input from equity-focused communities, and how it is addressed, positive and negative impacts likely to be created by a project. And then she had a follow-up comment for that. Our hope is that the purpose will be to incentivize project sponsors to consult equity-focused communities when selecting and planning projects, consider and address / mitigate / avoid negative impacts to equity-focused communities, consider safety justice, consider and address, seek to implement a good share of transportation investments benefits to equity-focused communities, consider and address past harms to equity-focused communities, and consider local hiring programs when implementing projects in equity-focused communities.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks for pointing us to the tool and kind of breaking down what it's looking at.
Oh, go ahead, Sequoia, I'm sorry.
Just one more follow-up. Yeah, we really honor and value the deep work that so many of you are doing around this, and really want to just highlight what you're doing and what you're seeing is working or not working. So we really appreciate you bringing in all these tools and strategies. So yes, please continue.
Yes, so bear with me, I'm sorry. Just we do have several more comments. So the next one is from Steve Bertlebow, And this one says low-income populations have little time to express their opinions about projects. It's necessary to develop person-to-person methods of understanding their needs.
Thank you.
Next, we have from Jennifer Tendick. Consider requiring projects to demonstrate benefit to the community, likely through continued engagement, rather than simply locating a project within a specific community boundaries. Regions should be allowed to define their disadvantaged or vulnerable communities rather than the state defining geographic areas. The state could provide criteria to consider, for example, race, income, etc.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And then we were joined by our own commissioner, Commissioner Liu. Welcome, Commissioner Liu. So he did submit a comment for the additional topics to consider. This says the quote unquote pipeline projects that have been proposed and are moving forward despite not having been subject to equity and VMT impact analysis.
Thanks, Commissioner Liu.
Next up, this comment is from Celeste Fiore. In the MTC region, county transportation agencies create community-based transportation plans that engage local communities to inform the CTA of the projects that they want. Top up, not top down. CBTPs become the resource for programs of projects.
Great, thank you.
We also received a comment from Becky Frank regarding a tool called the STEAP tool, STEAP. So they shared the link for that. So we'll go ahead and see that and can share it if we need to, or it's a resource that we can use. So thank you for sharing that, Becky. And then it looks like 2 more comments. Thanks for bearing with me, Sequoia.
No, I'm here for it. We have a lot of time for this. We are in no, so yes, this is wonderful. And please keep them coming in if there's more. Thank you.
So our next one is from Carrie Cartwright. Equity outcomes should be semi-qualitative. For example, low, medium, high, almost impossible to track the equity for individual projects. And then next from Paul Krupka, a suggestion, how about issuing a follow-up poll, including carefully crafted questions that react to this discussion and the feedback you received? Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
And then last but not least for now, from David Granis, just letting us know of another tool from Metro, which is called the Rapid Equity Assessment. They say that this can be useful for commission staff to review. So thank you for sharing that, David. It looks like that's it for written questions and comments so far, Sequoia, and I'm not seeing any more hands raised.
Okay, great, thank you. That was a good amount of topics to consider. So thanks to those who were able to participate in this part of the discussion. And again, if things come up for you in the future and you want to reach out to us, please feel free. And I did hear the follow-up poll for the discussion, and we'll definitely look into that. I think that would be another really useful way of continued conversation. Okay, so can we move on to the next slide, please, then? So another discussion that we would like to have is focused on what are some challenges that you or your organization have faced while incorporating equity into your project development and funding applications. And again, you're welcome to drop it in the chat or raise your hand so we can hear your voice. And I can just add that in some of the conversations that we've been having with our external stakeholders at state agencies and regional agencies and advocacy partners, I'd say that one thing that I've been hearing is kind of like having the flexibility to express the nuances of the individual communities has been a big thing that folks are asking for, that we're hearing they're asking for. Other things that I've heard over time are having so many different applications and maybe for one area to benefit multiple ways and needing kind of like a streamlined approach to improve equity. So those are just some of the things that I've heard over time, but we'd really love to hear from this group some of your challenges that you faced. And let us know, Kayla, if you see any hands or chat.
Thanks, Sequoia. I do believe we just received a few more comments in the questions tab.
Great.
So this one is from Patricia Chen, sharing a challenge. Equity is a broad and dense topic. Our Office of Equity and Race staff are very stretched to evaluate it for all projects. CTC may need to staff up on this area.
Thanks, Patricia.
We received one more comment from Sandag, and it says that it has been challenging to, I apologize, hang on, let me start this over. It has been challenging to localize equity indicators for our region. That's it for written chats right now. And oh, one more came in. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'll go ahead and read this new comment. This is from Madeline Jacobson. For small and rural areas, there can be a lack of historic data documenting the community's needs. This compares, on the contrary, to bigger cities, which can more easily capture the history of communities' input and engagement in development of the project. This can ultimately make those small rural projects less competitive if they can't present the compelling history of the public's input. And then one more comment from Jennifer Tendick. Challenges with being able to pay CBOs and community participants with the funding we have available to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's it for now in the written comments and questions, Sequoia.
Okay, we'll give it a little bit more if folks have anything else to add.
Oh, we just did receive two more. So this is from Shelley Kwan at LA Metro. Similar to what Commissioner Liu stated earlier, there are projects in the pipeline or in approved sales tax expenditure plans that are committed but need to go through equity assessments retroactively. The next comment from Augustin Barajas. Obtaining full political support on integrating equity into programs. And our next comment is from Celeste Fiore. I concur about paying the CBO participants.
Give it a little bit longer if anybody has anything else to add. But so far, what we're hearing that equity is a broad and dense challenge, needs to have adequate staffing. Localizing equity indicators for the regions has been a challenge. Rural areas lack historic data, and which can make make it difficult to have competitive project applications. 2 times, it's difficult to pay CBOs with community-based organizations with available resources, and a +1 to the difficulty of going through retroactive equity assessments on pipeline projects and obtaining adequate political support. Are there any other challenges that folks face?
Hi, Sequoia. We did receive some more comments.
Awesome, great.
So the next one is from Akiko Yamagami. Data gaps and lack of established methodology to address equity have been a challenge. And then we have a second from Gracia Elenis to political support for equity-driven projects. And Marcella Renzi submitted a comment and said, resistance from more affluent communities.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, thanks for contributing to that.
Sequoia, it does look like we have a hand raised, so I'll go ahead and turn it to Cherry to take care of that.
Thank you.
Jillian Guizzato, you are now unmuted. Looks like, okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. My name is Jillian Guizzato. I'm the Planning and Programming Director for the Riverside County Transportation Commission. And regarding this prompt that's on the slide, I don't know that we have faced this challenge just yet, but wanted to speak more so on the challenge that we anticipate facing in future funding cycles. So to give a little bit of context, geographically, Riverside County is in Southern California and is often talked about in combination with San Bernardino County just to our north, making up the region that many call the Inland Empire. Our region is northeast of San Diego, east of Orange, and Los Angeles counties. Our eastern county lines also serve as state lines adjacent to Arizona and Nevada. So we span a really large swath of land in the state of California, and within our own counties and region, we're incredibly diverse. Matthew and Sequoia, as you both so aptly acknowledged, past decisions in transportation planning and implementation often were rooted in bigotry. And while I hope that at least in California, we've advanced beyond any such practices engaged in the past, I feel strongly that we need to be very careful not to impose new policies or criteria that create new harms. We're seeing state policies advancing through vehicles such as CAPDI that seem to leave out areas like the Inland Empire that, because of those past decisions and many others, of course, that are much larger than we have control over, like the price of housing, there's a move to disinvest in sprawling areas like ours. It's important to acknowledge a few facts. Housing in job-rich areas is by and large unaffordable to today's workers, so they drive east until they can qualify for a mortgage or afford rent, while also prioritizing their family safety and educational opportunities for their children. This has led to the unfortunate fact that 2 of our Riverside County cities have 2 of the 10 longest commute times in the entire country. More sustainable modes are desirable, but given the lengthy project development process in our state, often a few decades or more, regional transportation agencies like our CTC require time to pivot. I really liked what a couple other commenters said earlier. Steve Bertelbell mentioned that many don't have the ability, or in my words, maybe the wherewithal to engage. I think when it comes to looking at how to incorporate equity into SB1 criteria, I would encourage that quality engagement over quantity should be favored. And when it comes to how to incorporate equity into the guidelines, I also liked what Paul Krupka said, to keep it simple. So ultimately, I would just like to encourage the CTC to be very cautious as it proceeds in this incredibly important territory, to ensure that the state doesn't wind up harming one area that is equally deserving of equitable investments in transportation as the next area. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jillian, for that. Matthew, did you want to follow up with that?
No, I heard Jillian loud and clear, and I think it is absolutely a challenging and key concept to build into these programs, and making sure that we're, not doing undue different types of harm on parts of the state geographically. So it's great feedback, and I can I can say that we have a big challenge ahead of us to try and get to a place. The one thing I will say, because I think the comment about pivoting can be very difficult, especially, and this kind of goes back to the comment that Commissioner Liu had made, which was seconded a little bit after. I do want to point out that the programs are iterative, meaning we try to get better and better each cycle. And so this cycle 3, we'll be looking for a progress that I would imagine some of our stakeholders may feel is too far. Maybe some of our stakeholders will feel is not far enough. But we will have the opportunity to revisit this in the subsequent cycle to try and correct in a way that maybe we may have misstepped. So all this to say, my team and I with the SB1 competitive programs are certainly learning through this. And Jillian, your comments are very, very valid, as are everyone's comments. We would like to achieve perfection this round, but I know that is a very, very lofty goal. So a step in the right direction is what we'll be aiming for. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we were just in Riverside to visit you, so it's fresh in our minds and hearts. Yeah, thank you for that. Are there any other comments or questions? Cherry or
Hi, Sequoia. Yes, we have a handful of written comments now.
Awesome.
So the first one is from Kristen Villanueva. Consensus on what equity means over broad geographic area, having enough definition of equity to know if project meets those needs. Next, we have a comment from Gracia Lenis. Complete lack of infrastructure makes projects in rural unincorporated communities very challenging and lack competitiveness, which in turn disincentivizes local jurisdictions to want to apply. Next, this comment is from Paul Lafarga with Sandag. There are many agencies that are pushing for equity in similar projects in overlapping geographic areas. It presents a challenge to not duplicate efforts, but also presents an opportunity to bring efforts together. And our last comment for now is from Akiko Yamagami. I agree with quality over quantity on engagement, but that's perhaps all the more reason it's important to clarify what desirable outcomes we are striving for. And that's it for our written comments and questions for now, Sequoia, and I'm not seeing any more hands raised.
Yeah, thank you so much for these thought-provoking and heartfelt responses. Again, equity is important. It's about lives and about our environment and about things that really matter to us. So we really take this conversation and these ideas and these experiences very seriously. Thank you so much for contributing to this conversation so far. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next discussion that kind of we touched upon a little bit in the previous slide responses. But again, we're really interested in hearing how you're operationalizing these things and how are you identifying project benefits and how are you identifying and really labeling best practices for avoiding or minimizing negative impacts to sometimes we're calling them disadvantaged, sometimes we're calling them vulnerable or marginalized, etc. Communities of concern. Yeah, we'd love to hear more from you all, either in the chat or in this discussion, how you are identifying these elements. And we have plenty of time, so we can continue the discussion. And Kayla, go ahead and just let us know when you see some things pop up.
Will do. Not seeing any written questions or comments at the moment, Sequoia.
Okay.
And I don't think we have any raised hands either.
We'll give it a couple more minutes. So for a little bit of background, the development of these discussion questions comes from some of the questions that we've had as we develop our draft guidelines language, and realizing that it's really important to get a better sense of how these topics are being addressed at the regional and at the city levels that you are all working in. And so that's kind of where the framing of these questions come from. We're hoping to gain a little more insight in how to craft these questions so that they best and probably not 100%, but as much as possible are representing what you all are doing, what you believe are ways that we're going to achieve more equitable outcomes through our projects. So that's kind of why we have these specific questions outlined, is it's part of our process of crafting this draft language.
Thanks, Sequoia. We do have a few written comments now. So
thank you.
Our first one is a question to consider from Steve Bertelbo. How does a project affect adjacent neighborhoods? The next comment is from Marcella Renzi, and echoing Steve's comment, saying that we borrowed this question from one of our cities. How does this project benefit disadvantaged communities? That's it for written comments for now.
Matthew, was there anything you wanted to add around this discussion topic?
Sequoia, not right at this time. I think, we have outlined performance metrics. We originally referred to them as project benefits, I think, for applicants to provide for, positive attributes that their projects would be providing. So if there are specific indicators that we should consider specific to, equitable outcomes or outcomes that would be beneficial to disadvantaged or vulnerable or marginalized communities, those are the types of indicators I think would be important to us to better understand and seek to integrate, as opposed to, or I shouldn't say as opposed to, but in addition to other outcomes such as, throughput and safety and accessibility. Unless those indicators are the ones, and we have to be more specific about what we're asking for.
Sequoia, we did receive some more written comments and questions.
Great, thanks.
So next we have from Paul Lafarga from Sandag. We contract with community-based organizations that represent environmental justice communities, forming a social equity working group. The feedback that CBOs provides steer our work throughout project development. Next is from Joseph Stramaglia. What about CEQA and NEPA? Are there elements in those existing processes that can add to this effort? Our next comment is from Akiko Yamagami. LA Metro focused its equity benefit discussion in recent infra applications by focusing on access to opportunity, jobs and education from disadvantaged communities and student demographics, and discussed how a project contributed to removing barriers. And next from Madeline Jacobson, one way I view project benefits via an equity lens is the removal of barriers that historically, excuse me, my screen moved, that historically divided a community. For example, what transportation barriers does this project relieve? And next, from Paul Krupka, a project benefit we are using is travel time for project area walked, bike and transit shuttle trips, no build versus build. And next from Garcia Elenes, to answer both, if it's a benefit and if it has unintended consequences, adding how the project was identified. For example, was it in the pipeline? Was it through community conversations, etc.? Going back to my earlier point, if residents living in the community are meaningfully involved, then it will likely address unintended consequences. And then next we have from Augustin Barajas, high-level best practice is to simultaneously consider benefits, burdens, and engagement for a holistic assessment, so one criteria doesn't overshadow the other. And last for now, from Steve Bertelbow, pedestrian bike connections across limited access highways can help. Ideally, they should be a half mile apart. We received one more comment from Garcia Elenes. Having jurisdictions identify how said project is affirmatively furthering fair housing, complying with AB 686.
Great.
And that's it for written questions and comments so far.
Okay.
Oh, actually, we did receive a few more. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'll go back to reading the comments. So this next one is from Becky Frank, and they sent us another tool to use called the Steps to Transportation Equity Framework. And then, so thank you for sharing that, Becky. They said the report utilized the framework to improve shared mobility equity, but the framework can also be used to guide analysis/improvement of any transportation project. And then next from Akiko Yamagami, I think increasingly, in order to talk about project benefits holistically, we need to take multimodal approach. This is an emerging practice, but it seems to gain traction.
We'll give it a minute or two to, if anybody else has any additional comments on this. But this is kind of the end of the discussion. So want to really appreciate folks who were able to contribute directly in this workshop, and also invite folks to stay in conversation with us outside of this space. And we look forward to, continuing to engage with you as well as we put together our draft language, and hearing from you what it is that you are doing and ways that we can do better. And before we move on, yes.
Oh, yep, sorry, we received one more comment from Shelley Kwan regarding impacts. Is it simply a matter of consultation with more consultation with disadvantaged groups being better and less consultation worse? Or is it a matter of resulting action? Does a project which fully mitigates its impacts to communities equal a project with no impact from the outset? Is a project with only positive impacts to communities better than either of the former?
Great questions, thank you. Matthew, I couldn't tell if you had something to
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. That's a great comment, Shelley. I think I'll just admit, I think it would be hard to say that a project that has no negative impacts whatsoever would prevail above a project that had identified negative impacts and had mitigated or addressed or responded to those impacts, because we are very interested in applicants engaging the community and reacting to that engagement, reacting to that feedback. And so while I can't say, I mean, ideally, we would be getting projects that do no harm, and I know that might be idealistic, and so I would say we would absolutely continue to seek out projects that are appropriately responding to the feedback that they receive, because we, or at least in my view, that demonstrates the active listening component and the ability to react in a positive way. Understanding that not all projects will always have all positive outcomes or zero negative outcomes. But again, that is very, very, very good question for us to consider in how we develop this language. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So before we move out of this slide, are there any further comments?
Hi, Sequoia. I'm not seeing any more written comments or questions, and I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Well, again, thanks to everyone for your insight and wisdom. We really appreciate it. We'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And in our closing and next steps. And I think this is you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Sequoia. And thank you to our attendees who contributed actively today. I know, actually, I think the Slido and having the ability to anonymously contribute feedback is a good one. And so I think I would certainly like us to entertain and look into the feasibility of seeking out a survey to the attendees on this call to see if you potentially have any thoughts that you spent more time considering that you want to share with us. That is a great suggestion, especially on this topic. A lot of what we heard, is we got great feedback on what to consider. And when there was one question, like, where would you like to see changes made so that we can have real impacts to the programs? It was quite clear that the evaluation criteria for each of the programs will be an area that my team should focus on. And I saw a mix of reaction to either identifying ways to integrate it within each or multiple evaluation criteria, or creating a standalone evaluation criteria. So I can assure this group that my team is looking at it through both of those lenses, and we will regroup internally as a programming team and in collaboration with Sequoia and Laura Pennybaker on our planning team, as well as our Chief Deputy Director, Tanisha Taylor, and we hope to come back with some draft language that stakeholders will have an opportunity to review and reference and react to. I'll say, our programs are very different in the types of projects that they can fund, and so in a lot of instances, it's hard to make a sweeping statement about what every project should include or should entail. So I know that we've heard in the past that a degree of flexibility or a degree to treat project applications on a case by case will be something that's important to consider as well. So I really want to thank Sequoia for joining me in today's workshop. We'll have a continued partnership here at the commission and as a commission team, but we really do rely on the feedback that we get from each of our stakeholders. So we can, unless there's anything additional to summarize today's call, I think we were able to have the kind of open-ended discussion, or at least start the open-ended discussion that we were seeking. And Kayla, you can move to the next slide, which has some additional workshops on the horizon. So as you can see, as we have workshops for all three programs scheduled in January, starting with the January 12th Congested Corridors Program Workshop. On the 20th, we'll have a Local Partnership Program Workshop, and on the 31st, Trade Corridor Enhancement Program Workshop. So these will be general program workshops, which my team has kind of a pre-planned agenda that we're working on. So we may not directly revisit the transportation equity topic immediately at either of the three of these workshops, but we will absolutely invite feedback or questions that stakeholders have on transportation equity at these three programs. So that's just to say we may be continuing to work on what our draft revisions might look like, continuing to work on that through these workshops, but this will be the next opportunity to engage with us publicly. And I also wanted to mention, you don't see it on here, but I know that Sequoia and Laura are planning for an equity advisory roundtable where we can discuss this topic as well in early 2022. So my team has some work to do to develop some draft language, but we will absolutely bring that language back to a public workshop. We will notice it in advance and engage with this group again. So unless there are any comments or questions, I believe the next couple of slides are just kind of the default contact information. So Kayla, you can move to the next slide, unless we have any comments or questions.
We do actually have a few
ahead.
questions, Matthew, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the first one is from Joe Phil Borja. Will we be sharing the notes after this workshop?
That's a good question. Well, we will be sharing a recording of this workshop. We don't traditionally share the notes or the comments that are written into the question function, primarily because we make it a very strong point to verbally enter those comments into the workshop itself. So I do not anticipate sharing a transcript of the questions that we received or the comments. However, the recording, which should have audio and visual, will be posted on our workshops page shortly after the closing of this workshop.
Thank you. And then our next question is from Patricia Chen. She wanted to know if there's a deadline for draft language from us regarding the guidelines.
Ooh, that is a good question. I can tell you it won't be in advance of the workshop dates that you see on here. You know, I would like to say that we will notify stakeholders by this workshop that you see dates on here of when we plan to either readdress equity, transportation equity in the individual programs and any draft language. But obviously, when we do bring that draft language to our stakeholders, we will continue to accept feedback or suggested revisions up until the point of draft guidelines being issued before the June CTC commission meeting. Which again, as you all know, the guidelines will not themselves be final until the commission approves the final set of guidelines, which we're currently anticipating for August. So it's kind of a moving deadline, Patricia. But ultimately we'll notify the group when maybe our soft deadlines are approaching. But we wouldn't make that before our opportunity to share some of our own draft language.
Thanks, Matthew. And then we do just have one more question, and Sequoia may want to come on for this one, from James Cameron. They asked, how was attendance today with the equity tied to SB1 funding versus our past general equity workshops that we've hosted?
Well, today we had about 145 participants at the highest, and I'm not totally sure how other workshops have been. Kayla or Matthew, you probably can understand.
We've been generally between about 100 and 150 for each of the individual program workshops. Granted, I know a lot of our stakeholders are consistent and attend, the individual workshops. So but again, I'm not entirely sure if today's attendance has been much different than we normally have until we have a chance to review the log.
I'll add too, and I think I mentioned it earlier, but just to reiterate then, that we are having a similar conversation as was had today in other spaces as well. So we're trying to bring it to different places so that this statewide workshop isn't the only touch point for some of our partners out there. So that definitely would increase the amount of people that we're talking to about this. Thanks for the question.
That's it for written comments and questions so far, and I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Thanks, Kayla. Let's move on to the last couple of slides. So this is our general contact email. And I would suggest if you do have specific questions about any of the programs, you can certainly send them through the ctc@catc.ca.gov email address you see on the screen. You can also reach out directly to the program managers who are listed on each of the program sites, or myself or Sequoia. Our emails will actually be on the next slide. But the one thing I do want to say, and I've gotten a lot of questions about this in the last couple of months, we do not have, the commission's website does not have like an active email like one of those, I'm gonna date myself or demonstrate my technology unsavviness. If you want to get on our distribution list, please send an email to the CTC address you see on the site. I know it's not super complex, but I can assure you that you will, or anyone that you refer, will be automatically added to the Commission's distribution site. And the reason I bring that up is because I've gotten a lot of questions on how do you get on our general distribution. So just send a quick note to the email you see on the screen, and you will be added and continue to receive any updates that our entire stakeholder distribution list receives. So you can also see we have a couple social media, Twitter and feedback, which are hyperlinks and will be available on the PDF version of the PowerPoint that you have. And Kayla, you can go to the next slide and I'll wrap this up. So again, thank you for joining us today. My contact information, as well as Sequoia's contact information, are on this slide. And I just, again, want to first and foremost thank Sequoia for the partnership on this very important effort to the Commission, and thank each of you, our attendees, for joining us and contributing today. And we hope that you will continue to engage and collaborate with us as we move through the Cycle 3 guideline revisions. So at this time, I can say if there are any fleeting or remaining questions or comments, we're happy to take them. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a nice rest of your Thursday afternoon and hopefully a nice weekend around the corner.
We really appreciate all the discussion today, and yes, stay healthy and safe over the holiday season. Thank you.